How's everybody doing tonight?
Doing good.
I guess I should say, how's everybody doing 1 week into eating this way?
It takes some getting used to,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. I really think this is kind of the hardest it's going to be, but I promise it will get easier.
I haven't like forced myself to be like super strict because I know I'll give up. And my husband goes, I don't think she meant you should accept it every time. Like, come on now.
All about balance.
I've done much better. Like if I eat something I shouldn't, then I try to stick with, eating better or not making those choices the rest of the day. But it's definitely hasn't been all or nothing.
Yeah, good. Do you feel like you're getting enough protein in?
Probably not, but I'm working on chewing.
That's, you know,
That's
actually, I think for you, that's probably the perfect thing to focus on. So,
Yeah, I'm just working on chewing, and that is still a pretty big chore. So,
yeah. Miss, were you going to say something?
I just said that's important. It is. Yeah.
because I don't chew, I'm just like, let me get it in, and before you know,
Girl,
I'm sick, and my husband looks at me and he's like, "Are you counting?" I'm like, "Not yet."
rest and digest. You got to take time.
Yep. So I'm counting my chews.
Well, how's everybody else doing? Terry, or Sammy?
Okay, I'm back. I'm I'm doing okay. Some days better than others. So, that's life.
Yeah,
I'm good too. I'm good too.
good.
Just had a long day.
Yeah. And poor Sammy jumped onto the noon call, but we were already so far in that I was just like, I think you should come to the evening one. So sorry to take over your evening, Sammy.
That's okay. That's okay. I had to work late, so as soon as I got off, I went to grab me something to eat, and then I'm here.
Awesome. Well, glad you're here. How about you, Terry K?
Doing good. My I think sitting at the table, like that's been a biggie
Mhm.
because I tend to like eat on the run or stand or even come back to my desk and eat, and that's just horrible.
Yeah.
I've been rubbing my glands. Keeping protein on hand is probably, that's so I went and bought some stuff today because that's where I'm not doing well. So I'm fine to eat vegetables all day, but then I know I'm not getting what I need. And I've been pretty accurate on recording, and I'm always, the closest I get was like 92
That's pretty good, like for
grams.
starting out.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm trying to alter some things.
Yeah,
But I feel great.
good. That's
The
awesome.
sleep, though, because when you're detoxing, you've got awareness and kind of like the tingling or whatever, the pain
Mhm.
of everything leaving. My
Yeah,
sleep hasn't been very good in the last 2 nights, but I'm hopeful for, you know, we're going to drink some Noom tea
good. Yeah.
tonight. See if that helps.
And this,
Megan, you
well,
did say it was okay to eat some mixed nuts during the day when I'm working. Sometimes I eat some mixed nuts. That is okay, right?
yeah, that is on plan, but you want to be careful with nuts because nuts, it's really easy to like mindlessly eat and just
Yes,
start
that's my
snacking.
habit.
Yeah, so I would make sure and measure it out in a bowl. I mean, it doesn't have to be like the portion size it says necessarily, but in general, like a handful is a good amount of nuts to eat in one sitting. But I would put it in your hand and then put it in a bowl and then walk away, from the kitchen or wherever you keep them so that you're more mindful and not just eating a whole bag at once.
Okay.
Yeah,
And,
Yeah, I'll eat a whole bag.
yeah.
and the
Yeah.
other thing I found is some of them are like roasted in peanut oil,
Yeah,
and something we're trying to avoid. So,
well, yes, definitely. And so you do want to look at the ingredients, but also we'll like do a deep dive on that next week. So it might not be something people are even thinking about currently.
Okay, cool.
I'll be
No,
quiet.
that's good. My A+ student is just jumping ahead.
It is very difficult unless you look for dry roasted.
Mhm.
It just says mixed nuts. It has oil, but the only ones that aren't are because that was my search the other day when I was looking. I was looking at every package going, I don't want I don't want the ones with the oil. So
Well, and there, so it's the type of oil that's really important. And so, but still, it really narrows down because you want to avoid the inflammatory oils. But there are a few, like Costco has a few different nuts that are in the proper oil or are just dry roasted. And so they still like have that good roasted flavor, but they weren't using any oils. But yeah, you do have to be picky because most places will use really cheap oils, unfortunately. I'm curious, is anybody feeling hungry on this plan?
I'm not.
Okay, good.
I don't feel like I can eat enough. I feel like it's like, oh my gosh, I still have to eat.
Yeah, it's really hard to overeat, but also our society is real big on like portion control and stuff like that. And we're going to even talk a little bit tonight about labeling of foods. The whole portions on foods is just to be able to fit stuff on the label. So I don't worry too much about the portion sizes. Like if you're hungry, eat more. If, but don't stuff yourself, like pay attention to how you feel as you're feeding yourself, but don't worry about eating too much. It's pretty hard to overeat when you're eating nutrient dense foods like we are right now. Well, good. Any other questions or comments? Missy, would you do me a favor? Could you text Dory
sure.
and see if she's going to join and just, tell her that you're my
Yeah, will do. Got
perfect.
it.
Yeah. Which I think, have all of y'all met Michelle? I think
Yes.
so. Okay,
Yeah.
just making sure. Because I think it's just Dory and Anna who've been on the night one every time, but
Yeah. But Anna and I go way back.
way back.
Way
Yeah.
back.
Way back.
Way
Which is
before
awesome.
Meg.
Yeah.
I know. Way before, I mean, Meg was, gosh, that was 1990. So
Wow.
Meg was how old?
I mean, I
don't know.
graduated
I
high
feel like it
school
was
in
just a couple of years
87.
Yeah, that's just crazy.
11.
Yeah.
The
Anyway.
90s. It was just 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Got it. All right, I'll be back. I'm muting, but I'll be back.
Okay, thank you for reaching out to her. All right, so let me go ahead and pull up the screen. Did everybody get a chance to download the PDF that goes with tonight's presentation?
yes.
Awesome. Because it's got parts to fill out if you are into that, but also has a lot of good meaty stuff in the additional resources at the end. So hopefully if there's time, I'll walk you through that as well. I don't know why it's always so complicated to just share my screen here. And it looks like it's going to do the weird thing again where it's got the sidebar. But hopefully you guys can see balancing blood sugar right now.
Yes.
Awesome. And now can you see the agenda for tonight?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay. Good. So we've got a lot to cover tonight. Tonight we're going to be talking about blood sugar regulation. And I love the timing of this because right now, like Terry was mentioning, not sleeping great currently. That's one of the signs of detoxing from sugar. Some people might be struggling with headaches, also maybe feeling extra bloated and thinking like, oh no, is this going the wrong way? Like all of that is normal and part of detoxing from sugar. So I like to put this right here and let you know what you're feeling is normal. It's going to get so much better here pretty soon once we get rid of the yeasties and the beasties in your gut that like to live off of that sugar. So tonight we're going to start off just by talking about metabolic health in the US. And then we're going to talk about how the body reacts to sugar. We're going to talk about the different stages of glycemia, and then 3 types of diabetes, identifying sugar in food, and finally how to handle cravings. So first of all, metabolic health. So currently in the US, only 6.8% of US adults have optimal metabolic health. And this was a study done right around 2020, actually. So it was actually right before, but this is what a lot of newscasters would refer to when they were talking about COVID and people having metabolic syndrome. It was based off of this study. So only 6.8% of US adults have a healthy metabolic system. And this is based off of a study that was done by 55,000 US adults. They were all 20 years old or older. And the study looked at a bunch of, oh, okay, wait, I see Dory's joining. Make sure I could let her in. Yeah, awesome. Hey, Dory, so glad you could join.
Hi.
We just got started,
Okay.
but you know what, let me pause real fast though before we go forward and just check in and see how you're doing, because I checked in with everybody else. How do you feel a week into eating this way?
I'm okay. It's been a little bit of a struggle trying to stay on task when we have family in town, and so there might have been a day or two.
Yeah, that's okay.
But trying to get my brain right and like, we can do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
This is definitely the hardest week. It's going to get easier soon, but it is mental exercise, right? To
yeah,
change up what you've been doing and think through everything you eat. And it's kind of exhausting.
yes.
Well, awesome. All right. So I was just talking about stats on the US. So 6.8% of US adults have optimal health. This is based off of a test or a study done in 2020 or that finalized in 2020. And they specifically measured these different markers. So they measured blood sugar, blood pressure, cholesterol, and then waist measurement. And one of the things that's in the additional resources in the PDF this week is how to do that waist measurement on yourself. It's way more accurate and telling than the BMI charts that were created forever ago and make no sense because they're based off of French men. Most of us are not French men. I don't think any of us on here are French men. So check that out later on if you want to see a more accurate way to measure health with the waist measurement. But statistically, that percentage of 6.8 means that for every 14 people that you meet, only one of them is metabolically healthy. And so I'm really hoping that you can be one of them, and then you can help everybody else spread the word, help them get metabolically healthy as well, because it's definitely achievable for all of us. So let's talk about how the body reacts to sugar. And this is your little anatomy class for today. We're going to talk about the different organs that manage blood sugar. So most important is actually the brain, and specifically the central nervous system within the brain. Especially for women, stress management plays a huge part in your body's ability to manage blood sugar. And so I think I might have shared this for first week, but maybe I didn't. The whole reason I got into this line of work was because of my own personal health journey. And I struggled with pre-diabetes for about 5 years. And every year I would go to the doctor and do my annual checkup, and they would say, oh, you're pre-diabetic. Do you want to go on medication, or do you want to try to fix this with eating right and exercise? And I would say, I'll do the eating right and exercise, and then leave the doctor and be like, what does that even mean? And so I just kept on trying different versions of eating right and exercising. And every year I would go back and I was still pre-diabetic. I mean, it's good it didn't get into type 2 diabetes, probably because I was attempting to eat right and exercise. But it wasn't until I hired a functional nutritionist and she was able to identify right away the whole root cause of my pre-diabetes was actually stress management. And so she immediately told me to stop doing all the cardio that I was doing and to only do walking and yoga, and gentle yoga too, not even hot yoga. And and then I had to change up my diet just a little bit, but like that changed my life. And unfortunately, the longer that you deal with dysregulated blood sugar, the longer it will take to reverse it. But no doctor had ever once in those 5 years asked me about my stress level. And so it was just so eye-opening to me to have this woman, like, she just met me and she's like, so tell me about your stress level. You rated your stress level at an 8. What does that mean? And tell me everything you've got going on, and stuff like that. And so super eye-opening. It took a while to reverse my pre-diabetes, but even the first 2 weeks that I worked with her, I lost 8 pounds, and I hadn't lost any weight in years trying to eat right and exercise. And it was just shocking to me. So brain, super important in this, but then the brain manages all of the other organs that are key for blood sugar regulation. And the acronym for them is the PALS. And so the first one is the pancreas, and you can see that's number 1 on this little lady right here. And this is where the hormones insulin and glycagon are created. So insulin actually lets glucose and fat into the cells, and glycagon is the key that allows glucose and fat out of the cells. And so we want that constant in and out as it's needed for energy happening, and the pancreas is what manages that. Next up is adrenal glands. And so adrenal glands, they manage a lot of different hormones, including the list here. And these hormones play a big part in our ability to manage blood sugar as well. And something with this, I have people come up to me all the time and ask if I can help them balance their hormones. And I can, but before we can even address the hormones, you always have to address blood sugar first. So this is foundational to be able to have stable hormones. And so some people don't like that. They're like, no, just give me a supplement to manage my hormones. And it's like, well, it doesn't really work that way. The body has hierarchy. So adrenal glands are huge for that. Next up is adipose tissue. So adipose tissue is body fat. And I wish that we just called fat adipose tissue instead of calling it fat, because when we call it fat, people get confused and think that eating fat makes them fat, and that's not the case. But adipose tissue, especially the adipose tissue that is around the midsection, it holds on to hormones that create hunger signaling. And so the bigger your midsection is, the more of those hormones you have and the more hungry you're going to be. And so that's why that whole waist to hip ratio that I mentioned that's in the additional resources is important too. So as we can shrink that area, you're going to be shrinking basically the surface for those hunger signaling hormones to be there. And it will be easier to release weight, but also like just to eat healthy because you're not hungry all the time. Next up, number 4 is the liver. And so the liver does a ton of different things throughout the body, over 500 bodily functions. But from a blood sugar regulation, it helps you manage energy, it helps create ketones, and it creates cholesterol to make hormones. So it's really key in this whole process that your liver is working properly. And then finally, skeletal muscles. And so our skeletal muscles store excess glucose, and it allows it to be able to be used for energy as well. And this is why, especially, everybody should be doing some type of strength training, But any woman 30 or above especially needs to be doing strength training because we lose our muscle as we age and our ability to build it. And so really, really important. And the more you can build muscle, it actually takes the glucose away from that midsection, the adipose tissue, which then reduces your hunger cravings as well. Like you might feel hungry because you need fuel to work out, but you're not going to have constant hunger as you build your muscles. So for that reason, I've got this little challenge for you, and that's to try to move your body for 10 minutes after a meal. And so this could be as simple as going for a walk, but it also could be doing like air squats or something like that. Lots of studies show that this is a really simple way to reduce your glucose spikes after a meal. Any questions on this slide? No? Okay. So let's talk about the different stages of dysglycemia. So if you printed this off, if you want, you can like draw the little squiggle lines on the document. But the first one here, stage 1, this is healthy blood sugar levels. And this is ideally what we want it to look like. So your blood sugar just has this even like up and down, smooth throughout the day. As you eat stuff, it goes a little bit up. And then as your body digests it, it goes down and keeps on going up and down. In this scenario, it, for the most part, stays between 80 and 100. I can't think of what mg stands for. Mgs per deciliter. So, but with this as well, you'll have like stable mood, you'll have stable
Milligrams.
Thank you, milligrams. Yeah, milligrams per deciliter. So it will stabilize all of that. You'll feel basically good and have the right amount of energy throughout the day if you do this as well. And even with healthy blood sugar, sometimes it can go above the 100 or dip below the 80, but for the most part, it's going to stay right in that area. So that's what we're looking for and what we're aiming for. Next one is hypoglycemia. And so you can see here where it's between the 80 and 100, but then it dips way below that 80 as well. And so this comes from over-consuming sugar. And when you do that, the pancreas releases insulin to help regulate the excess sugar in the body. And then this leads to the blood sugar dipping below 80. The main symptom that you have hypoglycemia is that you experience feeling hangry. So that hungry, but also angry because you're hungry and not going to feel satisfied until you eat something. That's what hypoglycemia is. And I definitely used to struggle with this and would even get like shaky if I was missing meals. It's another sign of hypoglycemia. Next up is insulin resistance. So this is actually prediabetes. And so you can see here that the curve again is bigger than the healthy, but it goes above that 100 milligrams per deciliter. And there are a ton of people who are walking around undiagnosed with prediabetes. It's super common at this point in the US because of our broken food system. And the biggest part of it is from over-consuming sugar and refined carbohydrates. And if you're eating the standard American diet, also known as the SAD diet, so much of that food is infused with carbohydrates and sugar to make it more addictive. And so it's super frustrating that that's how our food system is. After that is metabolic syndrome. So another name for this is syndrome X. And so this can be pre-diabetes, but it also encompasses people who have abdominal obesity, systemic inflammation, and high blood pressure. And so you can see here, it's even bigger ups and downs, right? And then finally, type 2 diabetes. So with type 2 diabetes, blood sugar always stays above 126 milligrams per deciliter. And at this point, blood sugar is ineffective and not able to fully do its job. And most people who are type 2 diabetic do need to go on some type of medication to help regulate it. The good news is type 2 diabetes is still reversible. So even if you get to this point, it can be reversed with diet and exercise. But again, targeted diet, not the generic diet and exercise that my doctor told me every year for 5 years. So working with somebody to figure out the ideal diet for you is super important, or the ideal types of foods to be eating is super important. So there are 3 different types of diabetes, and we just talked about type 2 diabetes. But the thing I want to point out in this is that it used to be known as adult onset diabetes because you didn't really see it in kids, but just over the last 20 years that has shifted to where they just call it type 2 diabetes because so many kids are getting type 2 diabetes. And so it's no longer adult onset. And again, that's a reflection of our broken food system. Next up is type 1 diabetes, and this used to be referred to as juvenile diabetes because the type 2 was for people older. But now that that's changed, we generally refer to type 1 as just type 1 diabetes. This is an autoimmune disease, so it's a little bit different. It's not something that is controlled or changed with diet. Interestingly enough, in recent years, more and more adults are getting type 1 diabetes, and they're not really sure why this is. It used to just be something that was identified in kids, but all autoimmune diseases are on the rise. And so this is also one of those. So if you know somebody who's type 1 diabetic, they need a different plan than what we're talking about here. And then type 3 diabetes. Any guesses what type 3 is? It's something you've definitely heard of, but maybe just not heard. Type 3 diabetes?
Would it be gestational?
No, it's a good guess though. Any other guesses? Okay, so type 3 is Alzheimer's disease.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so recent studies have discovered that a lot of Alzheimer's is based on insulin resistance in the brain specifically. And while there's tons of research being done on how to reverse Alzheimer's, they haven't gotten there yet. I hope they do. There is also tons of research that shows that if somebody has Alzheimer's and you stop eating or cut back significantly sugar and carbohydrates, it won't progress from there. So it won't necessarily reverse it, but at least it won't progress. So if you know somebody or you've got a friend whose parents are going through Alzheimer's, definitely recommend it. I wish like nursing homes and stuff would change up the diet plans to make it more friendly to help stop the progression of Alzheimer's, but definitely something to be aware of. So questions on that? Okay. So let's talk about identifying sugar in food. So this might not be a surprise for you, but when you eat food that contains sugar, it actually makes you feel good, right? And that's because it releases dopamine in the body, and dopamine is the feel good. It's like a feel good high in the body. And the problem with this is the more you eat, the more your body also becomes resistant to dopamine, which means then you need to eat more and more and more. So maybe at one point you were happy with eating, 5 M&Ms after your meal and satisfied, and now you have to eat the whole Costco size bag of M&Ms in order to feel satisfied, and it's because you're not getting that dopamine hit. Also, there's been tons of studies on rats and sugar, and so rats are used oftentimes because they are similar to humans somehow. I'm not really sure on how that works, but I call out 3 studies here just because I think they're interesting. The first one was from Connecticut College, and they used Oreo cookies and found out that rats actually prefer Oreos over cocaine. So Oreos are more addictive than cocaine, which is pretty scary since cocaine is definitely illegal here, but sugar is rampant everywhere. But my favorite part of this study is that just like humans, rats prefer to start by eating the filling and then they eat the cookie afterwards.
Wow.
Another study found that we become dependent on sugar. And so because of that, it's got all the signs of addiction. So you can truly have cravings, you can binge on it, and you can have withdrawal from removing sugar. And then there was this study done in France that again just connected it with cocaine, and that it's more rewarding and more attractive to eat sugar than it is to take cocaine. And so you can see why food manufacturers like to sneak sugar into their food if it makes it this addictive, and we want to eat more and more and more. So now we're going to buy more and more and more. It's pretty disturbing to think about.
How do they get the two pieces apart with those little tiny paws? Just kidding.
It's a good question, though. There's a YouTube video about it.
Yeah.
So our system is also broken just in the way we do labeling in the US. So in the US, manufacturers are not required to list just sugar. They can break it down into the different types of sugar. And a lot of times they will do this on purpose to make something look healthier than it actually is. So even though it would be easier to just use, regular sugar in a cookie mix, they'll use 5 or 6 different types of sugar. So then it disperses it throughout the ingredients list. Also, even more frustrating, manufacturers can now create new names for sugar at any time and put that on the label, which makes it even harder to identify what is sugar and what's not. Along these lines, just in like the last 3 months or so, there was news stories everywhere about food manufacturers have now come up with new names for food dyes as well. And again, food dyes, not natural, cause all kinds, like are linked to all kinds of diseases, which is why so many countries outside of the US don't even allow it. But they also make our food more palatable and brighter, and therefore more addictive as well. And so to get around from people being like, oh, I don't eat, Red 40 or something like that, they've now changed the names. So you don't even know if there's food coloring in there. So here's an example of a food label in the US versus one in Canada. So Canada has different rules and they do just call sugar, sugar, but you can see here on the US, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I think there's actually another one that's not highlighted in here. But basically, by not just saying sugar is the #1 ingredient and dividing it up between 6 different types of sugar, it looks like granola is the #1 ingredient. And most of us think that granola is healthy, right? And so this is now a health bar. Whereas if you look at it the Canadian way and sugar is the #1 ingredient, it's like, oh, no, that's not that healthy, right? So it totally changes your perspective when you actually read the food label. And I'll say as well, like people ask me about counting macros, counting calories. None of that matters nearly as much as reading the list. So always read the ingredients list. That's where you're going to get truly what's considered healthy or not. And if you see a bunch of things that you don't even know what they mean, that's probably a sign that it's not that healthy for you and maybe a new made up name for sugar, right?
Mm.
So here's a list of names of sugar, and this is definitely not all encompassing. And some of these are, more natural versions. So like honey's on this list, or maple syrup, maple sugar is on the list. So these aren't necessarily bad for you, but it is important to recognize them because it could be just adding up to a lot of sugar, like that label with all the different types of sugar in there. Also, you can kind of tell if something has sugar in it, if it has malt at the end, juice at the end, or syrup at the end. Those are all signs that it's sugar. And then also the os or the tall, like xylitol, all of those are signs that it's sugar as well. Artificial sweeteners, got some listed here. And again, they're creating new ones all the time. The issue with artificial sweeteners, awesome if you're counting calories, but again, nobody should really be counting calories because calories aren't what's important. It's the ingredients that are important. And the calories tend to be up to 1,200 times sweeter than sugar, which then also means they are even more addictive than sugar. And so for me personally, I used to love Diet Coke and drink a ton of Diet Coke. And it's like there's a lot of things I have given up over the years. and just decide I'm not eating this anymore, or this isn't going to be part of my regular life. But Diet Coke by far was the hardest thing I've ever given up. And it's been over 10 years since I last had a Diet Coke, but I still, every time I get on an airplane and the little bar cart goes through and they pop open all of those cans and you can hear the bubbles, like every time my mouth waters and I want a Diet Coke. Like that's how strong the hold was for me in Diet Coke, but not going back. I also have a list here of sweeteners that are better choices. So of course, while we're doing the anti-inflammatory plan, we're not eating these, but afterwards they might be fun ones for you to try out and see how your body reacts to. So everybody's body is a little bit different, but you might realize that you do great with maple syrup, but honey's not so good for you. I had a past client who went through this program and she actually found out that honey, she was super sensitive to and would cause like histamine response for her. And pretty sad because she had bought a ton of local honey. So for the next 2 years, everybody she knew got local honey as gifts, which was awesome for us, but sad for her.
Megan, I like to choose a lot of gum. Eliana told me that I shouldn't be doing because it has a lot of sugar. Is that right?
Yeah, for this time period, I wouldn't chew gum, unfortunately. So part of what we're doing, like not only are we taking out inflammatory foods during this 21-day experiment, but we also are resetting our taste buds. And so if you can take that out for the 21 days, then when you start reintroducing foods, you'll really be able to tell whether or not you personally like the taste of things or not. And that can be pretty eye-opening too. So I would avoid gum.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I'm making you reduce your nuts and now the gum too,
Yeah, yeah.
but you can do it. Any other questions? Okay, we are zipping right along. So let's talk about food cravings. There are 5 different food cravings, types of cravings I'm going to talk about. So the first one is craving something that's familiar. So I think it was last week maybe or the week before, and I talked about Thanksgiving. And when we talk about Thanksgiving, most of us think of our favorite thing and our mouth starts to water because we're excited about that food. So that's definitely one form. Another one I think of all the time is just going into a movie theater. And as soon as you walk in, it's like, I gotta have popcorn because that's what you do at the movie theater, right? And so that's the connecting the familiar with something, and that's why you're craving it. And so if you can think of ways to get around it or plan ahead, that definitely makes it easier. So with the Thanksgiving meal, maybe you discover through this that you can't handle gluten. And so instead of doing the regular stuffing or dressing, you do it gluten-free. And like with the popcorn, I personally am super sensitive to corn. So I still crave popcorn when I go to the movie theater because it smells like it. I swear that they put it in like the air vents so that you want to have the popcorn. But I just try to eat more protein before I go to the movie theater. And then I'm not hungry for it anyways, even though it smells really good. So the second way is you could be having food cravings because you need specific nutrients. And so I thought this was fascinating when I first learned this, but a lot of women crave chocolate during their PMS period or during their period. And that's actually because our minerals drop during that time and we need more magnesium. And so chocolate is one way to get magnesium, but of course chocolate also has sugar in it. But next time you have that super strong craving for chocolate, try eating like just a handful of nuts and see if that satisfies your craving, because nuts are also high in magnesium. And so sometimes that's what you're craving. Another example would be craving salty foods. And so then you buy like the big bag of Lay's potato chips. Well, that's not going to be able to satisfy you because Lay's uses the really cheap salt that doesn't have all the minerals around it. And so if it truly is sodium that you're craving, maybe it would satisfy it. But if you're using good quality table salt, it's filled with minerals and you're going to feel more satisfied and not be able to eat a ton of food if you're getting the right type of minerals. Next one, this one's a little bit counterintuitive, but sometimes we crave stuff because we have a food sensitivity and we literally are feeding ourselves because we get a histamine response to the food, and histamine responses tend to actually feel good for us. It releases endorphins. I know not everybody feels this way, but for me, like I love the feeling of sneezing. It's just like this release, right? And so
Mhm.
that's that histamine response. And that one's a little bit more extreme because we can feel it. But when we're eating foods that we are sensitive to, sometimes we get a low dose of that. And so that makes us want to eat it more as well. And every time I do food sensitivity testing on a client, there's always some food on there that they're like, I eat that all the time. I love that. How could I be sensitive to that? And it's this right here is the reason why. Next up is kind of similar to that, but it's the yeasties and the beasties. So our gut is made up of trillions of different microbes. And when everything's working right and everything's in balance, they help us out tremendously. But every now and then we get bad microbes and they throw off everything, and they can make you start to crave certain foods more as well. And so it's kind of disturbing to think, but sometimes you're eating to actually feed something else that's inside of you. And then finally, sometimes what you crave is not actually food. So this is emotional eating. And so when you feel stressed, bored, lonely, sad, angry, or even happy, then you might be reaching for foods for comfort. And the key thing with this is really to identify the reason you're eating, and not even shame yourself for eating when you have these feelings, but starting to recognize it is huge. So I actually just this weekend finished reading a book on eating disorders. And in one of the chapters where they were talking about overeating, it was so cool to read different people's testimonials of doing a food and mood journal. And so they were writing down what they were eating, but also writing down their mood all the time. And then they would start connecting the dots. So this one woman was talking about that anytime she had an interaction with her mom, well, I guess back up, growing up, her mom and her did not have a close relationship, and her mom was really hard on her. And so as an adult, anytime she had an interaction with her mom, she noticed right afterwards she would reach for something sweet. And she realized that she was really wanting and craving like sweetness in that relationship, the sweetness and the kindness. And so that's why she was reaching for the sweet food. And then like through that realization and seeing it repeated over and over and over again, then when she interacted with her mom, she still sometimes ate the sweet food, but the recognition of what she was looking for, she at times was able to replace it with like a hug from her husband or something like that. And so doing that food and mood journal together can be super enlightening for you to start connecting the dots on why you might be reaching for certain foods to try to fill up a void that you have inside. So with food cravings, you always want to try to identify why you have the food craving, and then don't feel any shame about it. So a lot of times society will say that like you don't have willpower because you're constantly eating and you're mindlessly eating. It has nothing to do with willpower. But there is a root cause. So with all of these, there's different root causes. So if you're craving something that's familiar, then the best thing you could do is try to find a healthy alternative if it's a food that you've determined is not good for your body. You know, if it's chocolate and you've determined that chocolate is fine for your body, just eat the chocolate, you know. But if it's something that's not good for your body, so like for me, if I eat corn, I break out in cystic acne. So like I really try to avoid corn. And so I try to find other things that would work for me. If you need a specific nutrient, then find a healthy alternative. So again, like if you start to crave chocolate, see if eating some nuts would be able to curb that, because it's actually magnesium that you're craving. If you might have food sensitivities, the best thing to do with this is to actually do a food sensitivity test. So MRT is the gold standard of food sensitivity tests. It's actually one that I offer in my practice. So it takes, I think, 6 vials of blood. It takes a lot of blood, but then it compares it to 170 different foods and chemicals. And I mention the amount of blood only because a lot of times you see, like, especially we're talking about it now. So next time you jump on social media, you're probably going to see some like test where you spit on an envelope and send it in, and they'll tell you your food sensitivities, or you prick your finger and they'll tell you your food sensitivities. Those are not accurate They're definitely a money grab. The thing with this one is they literally take your blood and then put it in 170 different vials and then add the food or the chemical to it and then measure how the blood reacts to it. So it's a much more accurate version of finding out what you truly are sensitive to. And the cool thing with food sensitivities as well is that they are reversible. So if it's a true allergy where you go into like anaphylactic shock or need to carry an EpiPen, those aren't reversible. But if it's not that, then they are reversible. So even like my corn sensitivity is not an allergy. So through gut healing and stuff at some point, and even now, I can have corn every now and then and not have cystic acne, but I'm still not totally there. So the next one, if it's the yeasties and the beasties, the best thing to do is another lab test. This is called the GI map. And so this is a stool test that literally measures what happens from the time you put food in your mouth to the time it comes out the other end. And it looks at all the different yeasties and beasties and identifies what's going on. And so for me personally, anytime somebody wants a food sensitivity test, I actually do these two together because it does no good to know what you're sensitive to without knowing why you're sensitive to them. And so I like to do them together because then we know, oh, you're sensitive to these 12 foods, but it's because of these yeasties and beasties. And so if we address these yeasties and beasties, then we can add these foods back in. And so that's how you get to actual healing versus just this constant cycle or narrowing and narrowing and narrowing the amount of food that you can eat. And then finally, for the emotional cravings, for that, the best thing is to do is number one, to journal, like I said before, but also just try to change your state of mind. So maybe you want to eat something because you're bored. Try going for a walk and see if that, changes the way you're feeling and the hunger you're feeling. And that takes us to the end of tonight's class. So any questions?
How often do you recommend doing the GI map and the MRT?
I just think for some people, it's a one and done. So when I do it with my clients, I do it as part of a 6-month package, and the MRT and the GI map we do in the beginning, then we take out the foods that you're sensitive to, address the stuff from the GI map, add back in the foods, and then we do another GI map just to make sure that we've killed off the yeasties and the beasties. But generally people can do it once and then don't need to do it again if you've truly addressed everything. I think I've only had one client where we retested and we did address everything that was initially the problem, but then she had new problems. So it was like, okay, well, now we need to address this. But yeah, all of my other clients, once we've retested, it's been good to go. Any other questions?
Did those 12 things that you're reacting to change so then you can eat them again? So that's
Yeah.
what you're saying?
Yeah. For most people, if the reaction isn't totally gone, then, maybe you can have it occasionally. So that's me with corn. I can have it occasionally, but I just generally don't. I think because I'm so scarred from years and years and years of cystic acne, it just kind of scares me. But so for me personally, this was so shocking as well. So I for years did things like Whole30s because I knew I had some type of food sensitivity. And so I would take out all of these foods and then add them back in. But the acne was the big thing for me, acne and headaches. And so when I finally went to school to learn how to do these tests, I did them all on myself. And my number one food sensitivity was rosemary. And I never in a million years would have thought rosemary. But I also, so I really love the Simple Mill almond crackers, and they have rosemary in it. And I would eat them almost every day. And so I don't know if that was me, feeding something inside of me or feeding the food sensitivity, but that was shocking. So my top 3 was rosemary, soy, and then it was like blue dye number 40 or something like that. Like that one, I was like, I could care less about that. I try not to eat foods with dyes in them anyways, But the rosemary was so interesting because, I cut those out completely. And then I had other things I was sensitive to, but not as such a high level. But rosemary, I really didn't think it was going to make a difference. But 3 months in, it was Christmas time, and my family came over here for, just family gathering. And I made roast beef sliders, and it was like a build your own. But the recipe called for fresh rosemary, and we always grow rosemary in our front yard. And so I went out and just cut a sprig to be able to let other people sprinkle on top of theirs. And just walking from the front yard to my kitchen with it in my hand started to go numb. And I was like, what? It was so crazy. And, set it down and wash my hand. And after 15 minutes or so, I felt the feeling again. But part of my spine disease, I used to have one side of my body always go numb as well. And so then it was like, was that the spine disease, or was that rosemary before as well? And then just thinking, like, if I was eating all the time, was I numbing other parts of my body? And so now I'm fine with rosemary, and it doesn't make me numb, but it was super eye-opening to notice, like, just this little nuance that was different, once I gave up rosemary for a while and then happened to touch it, not even eat it, but just touch it and feel the numbness.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my top one was sunflower seeds, and I was like, well, that's random.
Yeah.
Sunflower seeds, soy, and I think almonds.
Mm.
And I was like, it ended up being like, because my yellows and my reds were foods that I ate all the time, a lot of. And so I was like, is this thing rigged?
Yeah. That's frustrating. So
But to be curious to
find
take it again and see what it's like.
yeah, when you did it before, did you know why? Like, did you do a GI map or something like that as well?
I did do them together, but the doctor that I was seeing at the time was a quack, and so they were not looked at together.
Yeah.
And I was a hot mess then, so I'm not sure that she could have helped me if she wanted to.
Yeah.
So I've had people bring up, doing it again, but Dr. Robbins does muscle testing,
Mhm.
and so he's relying on that.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of like, do I do it? Do I not? I don't know. What's the dollar?
Yeah, cost definitely does go into consideration, unfortunately.
Yeah, if I remember right, it was not a cheap test.
It's not, but it's definitely informative.
Yeah.
Oh, we lost Sammy. Maybe he'll
Oh,
be back in. We weren't even talking about girl stuff.
right. I don't know, maybe the GI map did him in.
Right.
Collecting that sample is not pleasant.
No, it's not. And also interesting so literally for this test, you have to poop in a box, which is pretty weird. But then you mail it in. And when I mailed it in, I was thinking, did like the FedEx people know what they are handling?
Probably.
Things you don't think about till you have to think about them. Yeah.
Make you never want to touch an unidentified package ever again.
Right.
I don't know. FedEx handles things like boxes of crickets that are food for
Yeah.
animals in the zoo, or
True.
boxes of turtles that break open on the conveyor belt and the turtles escape. This is a real story from my own child.
Wow.
So yeah, there all kinds of stuff gets shipped. So they probably don't even know what's in it, but
Yeah. They
Might not be
probably
the
don't
worst.
want to know either.
Okay, thank you, Meg. I appreciate you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Real fast before everybody jumps off, I do want to point out lots of good stuff in the additional resources this week again. So starting on page 9, I do have some supplement recommendations if you are struggling with blood sugar. This is the generic what I would recommend for anybody. If you want to get more personalized, then let's do blood work together. So for example, in this kit that's recommended, there is a supplement, MetaPower, I think it's called Advantage, and that has berberine in it, but it's 50 milligrams for me, who was pre-diabetic, I needed 500 milligrams based on my blood work. So like, if you really think you need more personalized, then let's do blood work. But otherwise, this is a really good place to start. So then on page 10 is tips for fasting for women. So I get asked a lot about fasting, intermittent fasting. And I'll tell you, if you have not gone through menopause, I do not recommend fasting for you. So our hormones really need consistent food. But if you have gone through menopause, then this is how I would recommend you do it. So most of the research that's done on intermittent fasting is only done on men. And then science says that women are smaller men, which is definitely not true. Like, I think we can all agree that we're not the smaller men. And so even if you've gone through menopause, you do still have hormones that are cycling. And so follow this recommendation and cycle your intermittent fasting and the amount of time. And if you've gone through menopause, you obviously don't have a day one of your period. So day one, use the moon for that. So women's bodies are very in tune with the moon. And so you can do the 28-day cycle of the moon for that. Then page 11 is the waist to hip ratio that I mentioned earlier. That is a much more accurate measurement than BMI. And then at the bottom of page 12, I've got an article that I thought was pretty good, a blog post about blood sugar monitoring. So if you want more tools for that, check out that blog. And that's the end of the document. So that's all I've got. But if y'all have questions, I'll stay on as long as you need me.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Are there ever times where people don't have allergies to foods or
No.
intolerance?
I think everybody has some, but there are times when people don't have anything. So it measures them green, yellow, red. And so I've had a client who had 0 red and just had yellow. And then I have heard where people just have green ones. And so the green ones are like a really small intolerance to foods. And so when I have people go through my 6-month plan, the green ones, we have it where you only eat them once every 3 days. So you kind of cycle. And so anything that you eat repeatedly, you're more likely to build up an intolerance to, which is why you want to change up your diet regularly. And so like eating foods that are in season makes it easier to avoid food sensitivities. Anything that's in the yellow section, I have people give up for just 3 months and then we reintroduce it. And then the red, we give up for the full 6 months. So yeah, I'm sure most people probably have some that fall in that green category, but as long as you rotate your food and don't eat the exact same meal every day, you should be fine. Like I heard recently, Victoria Beckham apparently eats the same breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day. And I was thinking, oh, I bet her gut is a total mess. Also explains why she's like that big, but like that is so not healthy. I know that makes it way easier to restrict your calories or whatever, but it's so not healthy.
Sounds boring.
Yeah, also that.
Ladies, I'm gonna go. The mosquitoes are finally getting to me a lot, so thank you.
Thanks,
Be
everyone.
with everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Hey, I just have one more question for you.
Yeah,
Do you take insurance?
I don't. But if you have an HSA or an FSA, and probably more so HSA, most HSAs cover nutrition services. So
I haven't looked to see what my insurance covered. I just know like I've been seeing, that, insurance covers nutritionist and stuff. And I was like, well, I'd like to get more done, but that hard-earned money is
Yeah.
it's hard to come by. So I didn't know if that was something that you offered or if it was something that you could give that we could bill it ourselves to insurance.
unfortunately not. If you can find a doctor who wants to order the tests, then I can review them for you. But at that point, the doctor will also review them, and although that's been interesting too for a while. So like Dory's talked about Well Within. I worked at Well Within for a year. Like I rented space for them and I loved working with them, but it took me a long time to find that doctor's office. And so I talked to quite a few functional doctors about renting from them and just talking to them about the testing they did and then the lack of education they had because they're doctors and they can just order any test. And I was like, as a nutritionist, like I had to do a lot of stuff to be able to do these, like to be certified to do these tests, whereas they are literally just getting results and reading off of them. And I was like, this isn't a good fit for me. So when I finally found Well Within, I was like, yes, this is the good fit for me. Because it was eye-opening and super disappointing to find out that even functional doctors don't take the time to really learn how to read
Yeah.
and understand these lab tests the proper way.
Well, and I was set to go to my doctor right before we started this.
Mhm.
But I felt like I went ahead and canceled my appointment that took for like ever to get into.
Oh,
I thought I'll get more information, I think, out of this, and I'll
Yeah.
learn more than just, well, let's do some tests and we'll write you a prescription or whatever.
Mhm.
So then I guess I'll just start looking. I don't have an HSA this year, but I'll start working on getting one together for next year because I definitely have some more work I want to get done and find more out. So goals.
Yeah. Well, and like a good place to start too, a lower cost option, it's definitely not going to give you as much detail as the GI map or the MRT, but the Zytoscan really is amazing. The downside to the Zytoscan is that it's a snapshot of what's going on with your body at that time. So like if you're dealing with a cold, it's going to focus in on that. But if you can come in at a time when you feel relatively healthy, we can learn a lot. So I actually just did a Zytoscan for a client I've been working with for 3 months. And so when we did it the first time, we got very little information because she had so much inflammation in her body. But for 3 months, we've really worked on reducing inflammation just by changing up the food she's eating. And so she came back in, and let me say this too, when she did blood work, the blood work really indicated that she had parasites, but the Zytoscan picks up on parasites. And so I was like, let's do the Zytoscan just to confirm that's what it is. And we couldn't get a confirmation that that's what it was from the Zytoscan. So 3 months, cleaned up her diet significantly, taken some targeted supplements, came back. The Zytoscan and parasites are the top of the list. And it's been really interesting too, because she's got a lot of weight to lose, but she's very type A, like everything is black and white. So she's been 100% or maybe 98% compliant with what she's eating and really frustrated that she's not losing weight. But again, parasites will mess with that as well. And so it was like, oh, yay, we figured that out. We cracked the code. So Zytoscan, all that to say, would be a good low cost option for you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something to look into. I don't want my journey to necessarily end in 2 or 3 more weeks. I kind of want to keep it going because
Yeah.
I feel like I got that little guy that pops his head in here that is going to need me for a while, and I want to feel up to taking care of him.
Yeah.
So, all right, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, and I'm always willing to work on payment plans too.
Okay,
So,
I appreciate that. Thanks.
yeah.
Meg, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
have a running phone note of questions.
Okay.
But the number one that I have right now, based on what you talked about with is related to intermittent fasting, sort of.
Okay.
I know Michelle does it or has done it or is doing it or whatever, and I've been walking and watching that.
Yeah.
Is that just okay? I'm gonna do it and let's see what happens, or I mean, it's just you don't eat when it's dark and you do eat when it's light, and that's about I mean, and that's it. There's no special anything other than eat more fats. I mean, as you say in here, eat more fats on these days.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that really is it. And so I can't even remember, did I put the light and dark in here?
Yes.
Yeah,
At the
it's at
bottom
the
of it.
very, it's at the very end of the eat when the sun is, eat
Yes.
when the sun is up, stop
Okay.
when the sun goes down.
Yeah, so that's a recommendation from me. The other part, the 30-day plan is based off of the book Fast Like a Girl, and she does not mention this, but tons of science back up. Eat when it's light, stop when it's dark. And so everybody across the board can benefit from that unless you live in like the Antarctic or something where, you know, it's,
Of course, yeah.
that's a little hard to do. But yeah, so that would be like generic. You don't even have to pay attention to the time of day. That can be super healthy and helpful. A lot of people who do intermittent fasting, they end up skipping breakfast, including my sister. So she skips breakfast and eats, you know, around 11 or 12, and then she's eating later in the night. And that's nice because you can be social and interactive with people in the evenings. And I'm sure that's why she does it. But our biology works better if we eat earlier in the day and then skip dinner. So, but again, everybody's body is different. And so I read this Fast Like a Girl, and I didn't even finish reading it before I was like, I'm going to try this. And so I actually tried this for 30 days, even though I knew I shouldn't. She did not mention this until the very end of the book, but I knew I shouldn't because I haven't gone through menopause. But the book was so convincing that this is amazing and perfect for everybody. And it's not until the appendix that she says that about menopause, which is super annoying because most people don't read a book all the way through.
Right.
Like I knew this and still I was like, it sounds good, I'm going to try it. And so I did this for maybe a month and a half, and my hormones were so out of whack afterwards. So even post menopause, you could try this and don't feel good on it. And that just means your body doesn't, like, intermittent fasting isn't for you, and that's okay. But yeah,
Okay.
if you want to try
Well,
it, then definitely try this cycling version.
I just would, trendy buzzword, intermittent fasting, blah, blah, do it, whatever. And I'm like, my body's not like your body, and my body's not like, and I, in your health questionnaire,
Mhm.
you ask specific questions about when do I eat and when do I feel the best. And I don't like traditional breakfast foods. It's very difficult for me to find something to eat that I want, especially right now when, but I'm not a yogurt and fruit girl either, granola. I'm like, no. And yet I don't want to, I have no desire to eat at night. And in America, that is the time when people want to gather and eat and whatever. And I'm like, no, I want to eat between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon and be done with my food.
Yeah.
So I may experiment with it just to not right now, but just to see, because okay, if week 1 is the most difficult, okay, this is my other question, and then I know you have other things to do. If week 1 is the most difficult and I haven't experienced any of those terrible symptoms, I haven't had trouble sleeping, I haven't had, the whatever, the headaches, the whatever, all these other things. Does that mean that my sugar cravings are not what I thought the problem was?
Potentially.
Okay.
I would give it a few more days. So normally it's within the first 10 days, but yeah, it might be that your blood sugar is not as bad as you thought it was, or that you're more metabolically healthy. And so your body's able to shift faster than others.
Okay. Because, Michelle petrified me
Oh.
about how terrible she felt. And my nephew's wife was talking about having the carb flu and whatever, whatever. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be awful. And nothing. So, okay,
Yeah,
all right. It was just me, I guess.
yeah. I mean, I would be happy about it.
Well, I mean, I am happy about it, but I'm just making sure that there's not something wrong with me, that I'm not doing something completely
Mhm.
off and you know, whatever. Okay. All right. Thank you for the extra time. I appreciate
Yeah.
you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Dory, did you have any more questions?
I did. Do you, when you have insulin resistance, is it worth doing the CGM and tracking your numbers, or is just less data, more data?
I think it's bio individual as well. So if you like data, then go for it. I personally would love to do a CGM. I just don't have the money to do it out of pocket. And since I'm no longer pre-diabetic, insurance won't cover it for me. But like, I think it would be fascinating because then you get truly a personalized view of how your body reacts to foods. And so everybody's a little bit different. So like there's a podcaster I listened to who said like he could eat a cookie and it was fine. It would, balance out, but he would eat potatoes and it would shoot way up. And so like having that awareness would be really awesome. But again,
That's what I
that-
found. I did it probably 3 months ago now. I
Uh-huh.
had 2 sensors, and it's like I could sit there and eat a bar of chocolate and nothing happened, and so I was like, is this thing even working? And so I'm like, it didn't really ever, the only time it really got crazy was in the middle of the night. And I was eating carbs at dinner, and so I was like, and then I wondered if the sensor, because my arm is bigger, if it was reading right. So one of my friends is diabetic. She wears it on her forearm. And so I have one left, and I'm like, do I do it? Do I wait till I'm done with the program and then do it when I'm like eating normal? Even though I'm not going to go back to that.
Your new
Or
normal.
like on this, should I see? But yeah, it didn't spike like I expected it to.
Yeah.
And I just like, one more sensor. What do I do with it?
See, I think it would be interesting to do the sensor at the end of this. So on week 5, between week 5 and 6, that's when we're reintroducing foods. And so to have even more data as you reintroduce foods to really know, because like if you haven't eaten rice this whole time, and now you reintroduce rice or whatever it might be, like to really individually see how your body reacts to these foods. I think that would be fascinating.
Okay. That's a good idea. Okay.
Yeah,
What is that? Just in time for Halloween?
exactly.
Okay. That worked. All right. Well, that was the only question I had.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm glad you could join tonight.
Yes. Sorry I was late.
No worries. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.